Tell me what's going on here. Donald Trump facing this impeachment. Of course, the Democrats and a lot of the media are so excited about it. But doesn't it in many ways just strengthen Donald Trump's hand? Here he is again fighting the outsiders, fighting the Washington swamp.
Well, Chris, there's lots of evidence that that is, in fact, what's happening. Certainly, his audiences at his rallies are enthusiastic. They're clear-minded that he is a victim of, as he calls it, a witch hunt. So at the same time, the other side is very much energized also. So we're heading into election year with a full head of steam from both parties. I think, of course, there are two great unknowns. The first is the impeachment issue, whether the House will actually vote. I suspect they will, probably by the end of the year. And then there is the less likely chance, far less likely chance, that the Senate would remove to convict, would convict the president and therefore remove him from office. The second unknown is the Democratic nominee. Who will go up against Donald Trump? Polls give an indication that Joe Biden does the best, but I'm not sure many people are putting a lot of stock in those polls a year before the election. And, of course, the president has a very strong economy, which is a great wind at any incumbent's back.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Joe Biden is he's likely to be a casualty of this whole impeachment push and investigation, isn't it? Because obviously his son had these involvements in the Ukraine, and Joe Biden's on the record. We've seen Joe Biden openly bragging, really, about how he has boasted that he was withholding American aid in return for certain outcomes in the Ukraine.
Yes, and there's a lot more about the son that we don't know. And the more you get to know about it, the harder it is for Joe Biden to say he didn't know anything. My favorite of this is that Hunter Biden flies to China with his father when his father was vice president on what we call Air Force Two. And it's in that visit that Hunter Biden secures this $1.5 billion investment from a Chinese company. It's essentially linked to the government. Now, Joe Biden doesn't say to his son, what are you doing on my plane? Why are you going to China? What are you doing here? Who are you meeting with? To think that none of that conversation took place, is really to believe in, snowdrops and fairy queens. It's just impossible that Joe Biden knows nothing about his son's business. And so, as you correctly say, the more you get into Donald Trump and Ukraine, you have to go through Joe Biden to get there.
Yeah, of course, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, they never talk about business or what he's doing to pay the mortgage. They only talk about baseball, apparently. It's highly implausible. Look, the other issue we've seen over the past couple of weeks, of course, is the big win for America, for freedom, for coalition forces, with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi blowing himself up after that raid in northern Syria. Not too much credit given to Donald Trump for this, just mocking his press conference and, of course, trying to make a big deal about a funny picture he tweeted, giving some recognition to the dog.
Right. Yeah, the media has really outdone itself in this occasion. Its penchant for criticizing Trump for everything imaginary and otherwise, and refusing to give him credit on anything. So the economy being a good example of how, despite record low unemployment, particularly among African Americans and Latinos, Donald Trump gets almost no credit. The New York Times continues to say it's a continued expansion of the Obama economy, which is just rubbish. And then secondly, as you say, on the al-Baghdadi, it was trying to create a storyline, trying to, in effect, detract from the accomplishment of our forces and of the president's administration, by leading us down rabbit holes about, the picture of the dog, or whether al-Baghdadi actually whimpered like a coward. I mean, some never-Trumpers who have gone so far over the bend decided that this was a good time to call al-Baghdadi, not a coward. He died, he died bravely. The Washington Post called him a religious scholar. I mean, it's anything that it just makes them look so crazy because they are crazy in their derangement. Donald Trump has made them all nuts, and so they do really crazy things that just makes them look really silly. And in its own way, that makes him look even better because the nature of his enemies is so unappetizing.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. They get crazier and crazier. Tell me about what's happened on the Democrat side with that Democratic Congresswoman Kate Hill resigning. Now, why is she resigning? This is her personal life, some sort of three-way relationship she was in. I mean, I thought the Democrats are all into personal liberty and, freedom of relationships. Why is it that her curious relationships ended up in her resigning from the Congress?
Well, look, I think a couple of reasons. The first is, of course, just the public relations aspect of it. I mean, the Democrats are trying to keep all the attention on President Trump, trying to make him the villain of every piece. So anything that detracts from that makes them look bad, that throws any shade on them, they've got to bury it as soon as possible. So I think that's what that was about. The other part of it, of course, though, some Democrats, younger ones especially, did defend Katie Hill on this. But Nancy Pelosi, I thought, was very interesting. The Speaker pointed out that her continuing service was untenable. And I think what she was referring to there was the fact that the House had opened an ethics investigation into Katie Hill over the allegations that one of her lovers was a legislative staff member, in other words, a government employee, and that would run afoul of, a subordinate to her. And then secondly, a campaign staffer was also involved, someone presumably hired by money raised under the federal election system. So I think that it was the public nature of who these people were that for Pelosi was enough to call for her investigation and to applaud her resignation. But you're correct, many other Democrats saw her as a victim of, whateverism, and so they fought to have her stay on. I think Republicans would have loved to have her stay on.
Oh, it was good.
That would have been a field day, a lot of headlines and the news coming out. But once she leaves, then the investigation effectively ends.
It was good enough for Bill Clinton. Obviously, their standards have lifted since the Clintonian days. Just before I let you go then, Michael, let me ask you to pin your colours to a mast. Who do you believe will get the Democrat nomination?
Well, I have believed for a long time that it would not be Joe Biden. And I have come to the conclusion recently that Elizabeth Warren seemed to be headed for it. I have yet to be proven right. I'm optimistic on my prediction about Biden. He hangs in there. He does pretty well. And I think somewhat ironically, Elizabeth Warren's fixation on attacking American corporations, and now her latest, this Medicare for All, where she put it out, talks about the amount of money it would cost. Some estimates say $52 trillion when you factor in everything. I think all of that is hard to swallow for a lot of Americans, particularly because it would require them to give up their private insurance, and she acknowledges that millions of Americans who work in the insurance industry would lose their jobs. So those things are making this a very hard sell. Bernie Sanders is for a similar program. So I'm beginning to think that Biden may make it through this pre-primary stage. The first votes are cast in February in Iowa, a caucus, and then quickly you have 3 more states, and then you have a number of states within a month. So Biden, it seems to me, is doing better than I thought he would by now. But it all feels temporary. None of this feels solid. He continues to do poorly in the early states. So I still think it will not be Biden, but I'm less sure that it will be Warren than I was a month ago.